Alright, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to OneClass. My name's Kevin. Today I'm answering some economics questions. A little bit of a background about me. I hold both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in economics. I also work as an economist. And what I'm going to be doing is going through questions that you guys have sent in. I'm going to be reviewing the answers from our junior tutors, adding anything that I think may be important. That's it. So we can get started here. Looks like it's working okay. Now this first question is extremely long that one of you sent in. Somebody had to do it, so I'm trying my hand at it. Bear with me as I read this for the next 5 minutes or so. I'll add in anything else I think is pertinent as I read through. And then we'll see what our junior tutor has to say at the end. So, question is, what does this article suggest to us about how people should go about to truly maximize their level of utility from their limited incomes? And the article reads, can money buy you happiness? It's true to some extent, but chances are you're not getting the most bang for your buck. New research is suggesting that happiness is determined not by how much money one earns, but rather how one spends it. University of British Columbia Associate Professor Elizabeth Dunn explains why. It's an age-old question. Can money buy happiness? Over the past few years, new research has given us a much deeper understanding of the relationship between what we earn and how we feel. Economists have been scrutinizing the links between income and happiness across nations, and psychologists have probed individuals to find out what really makes us tick when it comes to cash. The results, at first glance, may seem a bit obvious. Yes, people with higher incomes are, broadly speaking, happier than those who struggle to get by. But dig a little deeper into the findings, and they get a lot more surprising and a lot more useful. In short, this latest research suggests wealth alone doesn't provide any guarantee of a good life. What matters a lot more than a big income is how people spend it. For instance, giving money away makes people a lot happier than lavishing it on themselves. When they do spend money on themselves, people are a lot happier when they use it for experiences like travel than for material goods. With that in mind, here's what the latest research says about how people can make smarter use of their dollars and maximize their happiness. Experiences are worth more than you think. Ryan Howell was bothered by a conundrum. Numerous studies conducted over the past 10 years have shown that life experiences give us more lasting pleasure than material things, and yet people still often deny themselves experiences and prioritize buying material goods. So Professor Howell, Associate Professor of Psychology at San Francisco State University, decided to look at what's going on. In a study published earlier this year, he found that people think material purchases offer better value for the money because experiences are fleeting and material goods last longer. So, although they'll occasionally splurge on a big vacation or concert tickets when they're in a more money-conscious mode, they stick to material goods. But in fact, Professor Howell found that when people look back at their purchases, they realize that experiences actually provide better value. What we find is that there's this huge misinformed forecast, he says. People think that experiences are only going to provide temporary happiness, but they actually provide both more happiness and more lasting value. Yet we still keep on buying material things, he says, because they're tangible and we think we can keep on using them. Cornell University psychology professor Thomas Gilovich has reached similar conclusions. People often make a rational calculation. I have a limited amount of money. It's a finite resource, and I can either go there or I can have this. If I go there, it'll be great, but it'll be done in no time. If I buy this thing, at least I'll always have it. That is factually true, but not psychologically true. We adapt to our material goods. It's this process of hedonic adaptation that makes it so hard to buy happiness through material purchases. The new dress or the fancy car provides a brief thrill, but we soon come to take it for granted. Experiences, on the other hand, tend to meet more of our underlying psychological needs, says Professor Gilovich. They're often shared with other people, giving us a greater sense of connection, and they form a bigger part of our sense of identity. If you've climbed in the Himalayas, that's something you'll always remember and talk about, long after all your favorite gadgets have gone to the landfill. And crucially, we tend not to compare our experiences with other people so much. Keeping up with the Joneses is much more prominent for material things than for experiential things, he says. Imagine you've just bought a new computer that you really like, and I show up and say I've paid the same amount for the one with a brighter monitor and a faster processor. How much would that bug you? The experiment he has run, it bugs people a lot. But when people are told to imagine they've gone on vacation in New Zealand, and someone else has had a slightly better vacation, it bothers people somewhat. But you still have your own experiences and your own memories, and so it tends to trouble you less. In a recent paper called Waiting for Merlot, Professor Gilovic and colleagues showed that we also get more pleasure out of anticipating experiences than anticipating the acquisition of material things. People waiting for an event were generally excited, whereas waiting for material things seemed to have an impatient quality. Don't adapt to what you buy. Oh boy. Stay with me, folks. We're getting there. One of the main reasons why having more stuff doesn't always make us happy is that we adapt to it. Human beings are remarkably good at getting used to changes in their lives, especially positive changes, says Sonia, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, a psychology professor at the University of California, Riverside. If you have a rise in income, it gives you a boost, but then your aspirations rise too. Maybe you buy a bigger home in a new neighborhood, and so your neighbors are richer, and you start wanting even more. You've stepped on the hedonic treadmill. Trying to prevent that or slow it down is really a challenge. One approach that can work, she says, is consciously trying to foster appreciation and gratitude for what you have. The process of adaptation, after all, comes from taking what you have for granted, so you can slow it down by reminding yourself of why you value what you have. It can be as simple as setting aside time every day to follow the traditional advice of counting your blessings. Or you might want to keep a daily journal or express your gratitude to other people. Key is to find a way to remain conscious of everything you own and avoid simply adapting to have it around. Because you're working against your natural inclination, Professor L acknowledges that feelings of gratitude and appreciation can be very difficult to sustain. If your journal or daily list becomes just a stale routine, it will no longer have much effect. You might have to keep switching techniques. Increasing variety, novelty, or surprise can also help you to enjoy your possessions more. When things become unchanging, that's when you adapt to them, Professor L says. If you keep a painting hanging in the same spot on the wall, for example, you'll stop noticing it after a while. But swap it with a painting from another room, and you'll see each of them with fresh eyes and appreciate them more. Try sharing your possessions with other people too, and opening yourself up to new experiences, she says. This could even mean depriving yourself of your possessions for a while, perhaps by lending them or sharing them with someone else. Elizabeth Dunn, Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of BC and co-author of the book Happy Money, recently conducted an experiment where she sent people home with a big bag of chocolate, telling some of them to eat as much of it as they could, and others that they were forbidden to eat it. A third group could choose how much to eat. The result, the people who had been forbidden from eating chocolate were able to enjoy their next chocolate bar much more than those who had either eaten a lot or consumed their normal amount. Giving something up temporarily can actually help to preserve our capacity to enjoy it, Professor Dunn says. Try giving it away. You need some water or something after this. The paradox of money is that although earning more of it tends to enhance our well-being, we become happier by giving it away than by spending it on ourselves. That's the finding from a series of studies by Professor Dunn. She began by handing out cash to students on campus and telling some to spend it on themselves and others to spend it on someone else. Those who spent money on other people were happier than those who treated themselves. Professor Dunn has since repeated the experiment in other countries across the world and has extended it to look at whether people were still happy when giving away their own money rather than free money handed to them by a professor. She found that in countries as diverse as Canada, South Africa, and Uganda, giving away money consistently made people happier. This was even true when people were giving away their own money, and even when they themselves were relatively poor. She also worked with economists to analyze survey data from 100 countries in the Gallup World Poll, and found that people who donated money to charity were happier in poor and rich countries alike. The fact that we were able to observe the same effect that we'd seen in Canada in places like South Africa and Uganda was probably the biggest surprise of my career, she says. A lot of us think we'll give to charity one day when we are richer, but actually, we see the benefits of giving even among people who are struggling to meet their own basic needs. What moves the needle in terms of happiness is not so much the dollar amount you give, but the perceived impact of your donation. If you can see your money making a difference in other people's lives, it will make you happy, even if the amount you gave was quite small. Be sure to buy time too. It's also important to consider how what you're buying will affect how you spend your time. That big house in the suburbs may seem like a good idea, but a 2004 study by Eloise Stutzer and Bruno Frey of the University of Zurich found that people with longer commutes reported lower overall life satisfaction, all other things being equal. They calculated that you would need a 40% raise to offset the added misery of a 1-hour commute. Seems like a lot. Use money to buy yourself better time, says Professor Dunn. Don't buy a slightly fancier car so that you can have heated seats during your 2-hour commute. Buy a place close to work so that you can use the final hour of daylight to take a ball around in the park with your kids. Another way to buy yourself time, Professor Dunn says, is by outsourcing tasks you dislike. Whereas hiring personal assistants used to be the preserve of the wealthy, it is now easier and more affordable to hire freelancers and virtual assistants online to help you with either regular administration or just individual tasks. She's currently doing research on how people actually spend the time they save by outsourcing tasks and whether it makes them happier. The preliminary findings, she says, are that most people do become happier by buying time for themselves, but only if they use the time in the right way. Our hypothesis is that people will be much more likely to derive an emotional benefit if they think of it as windfall time and use it to do something good, rather than just taking it for granted, she says. But while buying time is a good idea, putting a dollar value on your time may not be. In another piece of research in progress, Professor Dunn is finding that when people think of their time as money, it makes them less likely to spend even small amounts of time on things that are not financially compensated. Seeing as time as money may have a number of destructive consequences, she says. We gotta be getting close. We are. Okay. We're in the home stretch. Money only brings happiness up to a point. When looking at all of these research results, there's an important caveat to bear in mind. Those in the field divide happiness into 2 components, and you need to have both parts working together to be truly happy. But only one of those components keeps improving the more you earn. The other tops out after a certain point. First measure of happiness is evaluative. Professor L defines it as a sense that your life is good, you're satisfied with your life, you're progressing towards your life goals. That's the measure used by economists Justin Wolfers and Betsy Stevenson, who have conducted extensive research comparing economic data and happiness surveys across the world. They're both excellent Twitter follows as well, if you guys like to follow economists on Twitter. We found very clear evidence that in just about every country around the world, rich people are happier than poor people, says Professor Wolfers, and people in rich countries are happier than people in poor countries. The other component of happiness, affective, looks at how often you experience positive emotions like joy, affection, and tranquility, as opposed to negative ones. Explains Professor L. You could be satisfied with your life overall, but you may not actually be happy at the time, she says. Of course, happy people experience negative emotions, just not as often, so you have to have both components. Daniel Kahneman, who authors a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I would recommend checking it out if you're into reading these kind of things. But Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton of Princeton University found that when they looked at effective measures, happiness did not rise after a household reached an annual income of approximately $75,000. They did, however, find a consistent rise in overall life satisfaction, matching the results of Professor Wolfers and Stevenson. I think that paper has actually been debated a little bit, and there's been some other papers going against it. You can look into that further yourself if you'd like. I'm not super well versed on it. It just kind of rings a bell to me. Regardless, the bottom line, when you don't have much money, a little extra can go a long way because you'll have more essential needs to fulfill. As you accumulate more wealth, however, it becomes more difficult to keep buying more happiness. Don't get in over your head. Finally, keyword finally, although much of the research in this field is on spending money rather than saving it, the researchers agree that spending more than you can afford is a route to misery. Taking care of your basic needs and achieving a level of financial security is important. Professor Gilovic says that although his research shows that life experiences give more happiness than material goods, people should of course buy the essentials first. His findings hold true across a broad range of income levels and demographic groups, but not for people with very low incomes. Those people don't really have discretionary income. It pretty much all has to go on necessities, he says. Some studies, meanwhile, have shown that debt has a detrimental effect on happiness, while savings and financial security tend to boost it. A survey of British households found that those with higher levels of debt reported lower happiness, and a separate piece of research on married couples showed that those in more debt had more marital conflict. Savings are good for happiness, debt is bad for happiness. But debt is more potently bad than savings are good. From a happiness perspective, it's more important to get rid of debt than to build savings. So before you go out and spend all your money on a dream vacation, make sure you've taken care of the basics, paid off your debts, and have enough money to shield yourself from the worst of life's troubles. Financial advisors are actually right, Professor Howell says. The first thing you should be doing with your money is building up a safety net. You go into debt to buy these great life experiences. The stress you'll feel when the credit card bill comes in will probably wipe out the good that you got from that experience. That was a mouthful. I do have a chart I want to draw and something to add. But first, we'll see what our junior tutor has to say. The actual question was, and this was more of a psychology article than an economics article, but what does this article suggest to us about how people should go about truly maximizing the level of utility from the limited incomes? And our junior tutor. So the article tells us about the relationship between income and happiness, whether or not money is the reason for happiness. It says so, as per Professor Howell, Associate Professor of Psychology at San Francisco State University, is of the opinion that material purchases offer better value for money because the experience is fleeting and material goods last longer. On the other hand, the paradox of money is that although earning more of it tends to enhance our well-being, we become happier by giving it away than by spending it on ourselves. So there have been different experiments to know where money can buy happiness or not. Some say it should be used for safety. Some say savings are good for happiness. According to some researchers, spending more than you can afford is a path to misery. So in order to maximize their level of utility from their limited incomes, the person should plan their expenses, spending on the basic needs first, and then concentrating on savings and managing the funds according to limited resources, so as to live a comfortable and happier life. In other words, budget, pay down your debts. Once you've built up a nest egg, make some charitable contributions, as you'll feel good about it. And vacations are good too. That's 10 seconds of an article that took me 20 minutes to read. The part I have something to add about here in particular is this line here. Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton of Princeton University found that when they looked at effective measures, happiness did not rise after a household reached an annual income of approximately $75,000. So what that kind of relates to is diminishing marginal returns. So our happiness does increase as our incomes or our money increases. And this, when you chart it and kind of talk it through, it makes pretty intuitive sense. So on the y-axis here, we'll have a utility. So it's going to be utility. And this is going to be called quantity of money, I guess. Basically, this is the amount of money somebody has, or they're making, etc. And the graph is basically going to look like this. It's going to go up pretty steeply at first, and then it's going to tail off. Pretty steeply at first, and then it's going to start to tail off and approach being flat eventually. So what this study is saying, Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, is basically saying that this point here-ish, is kind of the point where like additional household income isn't making a huge difference to happiness. So that's like 75K. And you can think about it, if you are somebody with absolutely nothing, zero money, and not to say that people with no money at all are not happy, but as we just read about for a very long time, happiness does increase with income or money. So if you don't have much money and someone gives you like $5,000, so your quantity of money goes from 0 to 5K, that's going to open a lot of doors for you. Doors that weren't previously open. Ignoring, our social security measures being, welfare, food stamps, etc. If you go from, in this ultra simplified example, if you go from $0 to $5,000, your utility is going to increase by quite a lot, by this amount here, because you can now do a lot of things you weren't able to do before. I mean, with $0, you, again, simplified example, can now afford food. You can now afford some shelter, some better shelter than you could have before. Whereas on the other end of the scale, when you have, $995,000 and you earn another 5,000, give it another 5,000, whatever. And you're now at $1 million. We can see the corresponding line adds very little to your overall level of utility or happiness, because when you have $995,000, an extra 5,000 doesn't really allow you to do anything, experience anything new than what you had before. So that's why there's diminishing marginal returns to happiness, and this coincides with this paper by Kahneman and Deaton, in which they saw that happiness did not rise much after a household reached an annual income of approximately $75,000. And again, that paper is disputed, but generally this is the economic theory behind why that is happening. All right, moving on to question 2, 25 minutes into this. Click this, right? Okay, looks like it worked eventually. So, White Rock is a small town in New Mexico with 1,500 households. The town of White Rock has an undeveloped lot on which you can build a new grocery store or a public park. So a private institution or a public institution. The average household willingness to pay for a public park is $100, and the total cost to the town of building the grocery store is $1 million. Total cost to the town of building the park is $100,000. The average household has a monthly budget of $500 to spend on food and other household items. Please draw pictures as appropriate to explain your answers. What is the total benefit, measured in dollars, to White Rock residents of building a grocery store? Explain, and it may be useful to draw some careful pictures here. So as we saw, White Rock has 1,500 people. Total cost of a grocery store is $1 million, and the average household has a monthly budget of $500 to spend on food and other household items. So, let's see if our junior tutor did what I'm thinking as well. The average household willingness to pay for public parks is $100. Accordingly, the total amount that can be collected to provide public parks is $150,000. This is the overall benefit, and you'll notice that that's more than the total cost. However, that's not the question. It's not asking about the park. It's asking about the grocery store. Total cost to the town is to build a grocery store is $1 million, and that of a park is $100,000. The average household has a monthly budget of $500, so we've got 1,500 households. Each with $500 to spend at this grocery store. That should equal $750,000, unless my math's wrong, which happens to me all too frequently. Total cost of the town to build a grocery store is $1 million in the first year, and that of a park is $1 million in the first year. Is $100,000 in the first year, pardon. The average household has a monthly budget of $500 to spend on food and other household items purchased from grocery stores. Hence, the total amount that can be collected to provide grocery store is therefore $750,000. My math checks out. Wonderful. Note that the cost of building the grocery store is $1 million in the first year, while the total benefit to White Rock residents of building a grocery store is $750,000. Hence, the net benefits are negative $250,000 in the first year. Moving forward, however, so if you were only looking at this in one period, you would not build the grocery store because you'd say, okay, the net benefits are negative $250,000. But in the following year, the grocery store is already built, so the $1 million in cost comes away. But people still need groceries, will still be shopping at that store, so the benefits over time are going to be grossly positive. So for example, in the second year, the total net benefits are going to be $500,000, then $1.25 million, then $2 million, etc., etc., etc. So the cost of building the store is one time, while the benefit happens in subsequent periods. Question 3. If you're up for a read on Brexit, can you read this article and summarize it, stating the pros and cons separately and your point of view in 500 words? Take a look at it quick. I think what I might do is just summarize over here what our junior tutor has written and add any insight that I may think is useful. Yeah, this is a very long article. I already read one very long article. So I think I'm going to do what I said there. I'll list the pros, add anything that I think might be important, although this does look pretty thorough. I'll list the cons and do the same thing. And then we can move forward because I only have half an hour or so left. So the pros. According to the article, Brexit, what are the pros and cons of leaving the EU? There are many pros and cons of Brexit, which have been mentioned below. Pros, A, it's going to be savings in money. Just 1 second. Yeah, I'm streaming, Dad. Can't talk, sorry. So what our junior tutor has written. There was the argument that leaving the European Union would result in immediate cost savings, as the country won't have to pay any membership fees to the European Union, which was much higher than the advantages received by the country in free trade and in other investments. So essentially, they no longer have to pay membership fees if they're no longer part of the European Union. I believe it falls on the taxpayer to pay those fees. That's how they raise the money for it. So we've got sovereignty. Honestly, not even sure if I pronounced that correctly, but give it the good old college try. Sovereignty. Great Britain will have more power to deal with trade issues with other countries that it has not been able to do as an EU member. It would be freer to enter into its own trade agreements. So basically the European Union, which is made up of all these different countries in Europe, can enter into trade agreements and negotiate with other countries as one entity. Of course, when you're made up of all these different countries, probably not every country in the European Union. It's probably not beneficial, whatever trade agreement they enter, for every single country, but it will be beneficial for the European Union as a whole. So if you are just acting on your own as a solo country, you can do what's in the best interest of your country specifically instead of the European Union as a whole. Now the pro is immigration check. People in the EU member countries have the freedom to move from their own place and live in any part of their member countries that have prevented Britain from regulating immigration. After Brexit, Britain will have control over its borders and check immigrants from entering the country. Because basically, if you're a member of the European Union, you can pretty much up and leave to any other country within the European Union without going through the typical process of immigration, etc. Yeah. D, jobs. This is kind of tied hand in hand with the immigration. If there's less immigration, that means, and if jobs were to stay constant and less new people are coming into the country, by definition, that means that there are more jobs going to be available by the people that are already living there. So for the people that are already citizens of Britain, it can be a good thing. Security. Brexit will allow Britain to control threats of anti-democratic policies against the country and its people. As there was free movement of people among the member countries of the EU, there's always the chance of terrorist attacks and violence, which endanger the lives of its people and the country. Kind of goes hand in hand with the jobs and immigration that we just talked about, so I will leave that at that. And lastly is power. Brexit would make it possible for Britain to emerge as a more powerful nation by re-establishing the country on its own. Besides, it would be able to make connections with other parts of the world. Again, if they're no longer a part of the European Union, they have more individuality as a country and can negotiate deals on their own terms instead of on the terms of the Union. Cons, on the other hand, downfall in the economy. Brexit would result in Britain to face a loss of 2.2% of its total GDP by 2030 due to cutting back all ties with the EU, which in turn will diminish all the economic linkings of Britain with the member countries of the EU and other parts of the world. In short, Brexit is very expensive if it's to go through. A lack of investment. That's just hideous. Of investment. Many banks and investment firms have moved from Britain to some other EU countries in the post-Brexit period, as these investors have lost their free passports across the continent. The revenues earned by Britain from these firms would have been lost as a result of their shift from the country. I don't know the exact tax implications of Brexit for companies that were working there in the past, but it sounds like it may have been possible that Brexit has made it a worse tax situation for them, in which case they will likely pull out of Brexit and relocate their companies elsewhere. Pull out of Britain, I should say. Problem of British people to move freely in the continent, I will call that mobility. Check-in immigrants from Britain after Brexit would make the British people living in other parts of the continent to return to their homeland, as they would lose the advantage of free and easy accessibility to the EU member countries. So those that identify as British citizens that have been living in other parts of the EU would either need to return home or pay fees. So it's likely they're not super excited about Brexit. Jobs as both a pro and a con. Amazing. Con side of jobs. Many people could lose their jobs after Brexit due to the cutting back of all ties with the EU if trade and investment will not grow as before. So earlier when we talked about the lack of investment, if companies are pulling out of Britain, that means that jobs are being pulled out of Britain as well. So if some investment company, for example, pulls its offices out of Britain and they had 500 British people working there, they're now out of a job, or they need to follow the company to wherever they're moving. Decrease in the labor supply. This will be because people cannot move freely within Britain as part of the EU anymore. Controlling immigrants by Britain would result in a loss of labor force and skilled workers from other parts of the world, which would negatively affect the growth of industries and firms and impact its economy. I think that sums it all up. Closing statements were if Britain maintains a cordial relationship after the Brexit with the EU, it would serve good for the prosperity of Britain, as there are many strong members in the EU, like Germany, France, Spain, Italy, etc. I think those are all G20 countries, who pose a stronghold to the world economy. Although Britain has decided to rebuild its economy on its own, many economists point out that the economy of the country would fall and damage Britain's outlook. Many analyses have been generated on Britain's loss and gains on Brexit. The cost of Britain to redevelop its trade agreements and bilateral ties with other partners would be initially very high, so we have to build everything from its inception, which might also affect the business of its partners also. But since the country has a rich heritage from the beginning, it would not be much harder for it to emerge as a strong nation. Brexit is a heavily debated topic. If you're interested in it, I'd recommend reading this article and many others and forming your own point of view on it. That was a very good summary by our junior tutor. Question 4. Discuss and critique sustainable development. What are the key factors that differentiate it from the classic growth and development models? How does the World Bank and other international development agencies address the problems of achieving sustainable development? And our junior tutor has written that sustainable development is a development that aims at economic growth without damaging and preserving the currently available natural resources and the environment for future generations. Sustainable development is a development that can be sustained over the long term. Sustainable development is necessary in order to preserve the environment for future development. Without sustainable development, it would be difficult to imagine a better economic situation in the future. Have a second here. Key factors that distinguish sustainable development from classic growth and development models are that classic growth and development models are aimed solely at the growth and development of income levels, GDP, productivity, sales, and other monetary variables, whereas sustainable development aims to improve the quality of life in a comprehensive way, including economic prosperity, social equity, and environmental protection. Economic, social, environmental, and cultural aspects must be integrated in a harmonious manner to enhance intergenerational well-being. According to the World Bank, the 3 pillars of sustainable development are economic growth, environmental stewardship, and social inclusion. Extreme poverty, income inequality within and between countries, huge economic and social costs stemming from unsustainable consumption and production. Thus, sustainable development can only be achieved through legitimate economic and social progress with growth and employment, and at the same time by strengthening environmental protection for future generations. So basically the key takeaway here is classically. Unfortunately, all too much in practice. The objective of firms, or I suppose maybe the macro objective of a country, is to maximize GDP. When we are trying to develop sustainably, we still want to maximize GDP. So that's maximizing our output. But it's going to be subject to more constraints than I suppose it has been classically. So it's going to be subject to, environmental, and social limitations, I'll call it. And this can look like a number of things, like I think kind of I'm trying to multitask here and I'm failing. Environmental and social limitations. It basically adds an extra set of constraints. So maxing GDP, but for example, environmentally, getting the most output we can, while keeping our net emissions at zero. So for example, like offsetting what you need to use in gas or oil, or for example, more broadly, every tree you need to use, you plant a new one, things of that nature. Then there's the social side of it as well. I don't want to dig too much deeper because we are running out of time. But the gist of it is to maximize GDP with a more mindful set of constraints. Question 5. Timmy is rather confused. He thinks all of the following are part of the Washington Consensus, but he is wrong. Which of the following is not part of the Washington Consensus? A. Balanced government budgets are good for stabilizing the economy. B. Foreign ownership of local commercial banks will help an economy to stabilize. C. A better educated workforce will be more productive and help an economy grow. D. Selling off state-owned enterprises will give the government more revenue. Or E. Free trade helps poor economies develop economically. Correct answer is C. A better educated workforce will be more productive and will help the economy grow. Virginia Tutor has said that the Washington Consensus refers to a set of free market economic ideas that are supported by prominent economists and international organizations such as the IMF, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the European Union, and the US. This consensus does not take into account the fact that a better educated workforce will be more productive than an uneducated workforce and will contribute more to the growth of a country. There is a particular website I have in mind from my undergrad. No, this is ringing a bell as to what it was. But essentially, the Washington Consensus is a set of sort of universally agreed on policies that are good for the economy. So there's looks like there's 10 original principles. There's criticisms. I would recommend looking into it further if you're interested. But basically what is included in the Washington Consensus are that balanced government budgets are good for stabilizing the economy. Foreign ownership of local commercial banks will help an economy to stabilize. Selling off state-owned enterprises will give the government more revenue, and free trade helps poor economies develop economically. Moving on to question 6. In an auction, potential buyers compete for a good by submitting bids. Adam Galinsky, a social scientist from NWU, compared eBay auctions in which the same good was sold. He found on average that the higher number of bidders, the higher the sales price. For example, in 2 separate auctions of identical iPods, the one with the higher number of bidders brought the higher sales price. Oh, that does make sense, actually. I'm just tired. The one with the higher number of bidders brought the higher sales price. According to Galinsky, this explains why smart sellers set absurdly low opening prices, the lowest price a seller will accept, such as 1 cent for a new iPod. Use the concept of consumer and producer surplus to explain the reasoning. Producer surplus. These methods will be preferred by producers to maximize the product's producer surplus in the case presented. It means that higher prices of the product will result in a greater producer surplus. By setting the initial price as low, when PS equals 0, there will be an increase in producer surplus with the increasing number of bidders without facing any losses. Consumer surplus, when the prices are low, a greater number of customers are attracted by the initial higher consumer surplus. Until the buyer's value, willingness to pay is reached, they will continue to bid. And I just wanted to maybe point out the difference here between a site like eBay for selling things and a site like Kijiji for selling things. With eBay, you're going to have perfect information in that as the buyer, if I want to go buy something on eBay, I can see the number of bids, I can see what they all were, and I can see the highest price that was bid. And I think psychologically, if I see that there's a lot of bids for this item and it's below my willingness to pay, I'm more likely to want to bid higher, I believe, is the psychology behind that. But what's important is that you have perfect information. You can see these things. On something like Kijiji, where you just post an ad for whatever it is you're selling, Kijiji, there is asymmetric information. So if I want to buy something, I don't know how many people have bid on it. I just know whatever the listed price is. So if I see something like a pair of shoes and they're like $50 cheaper than I would like to, than I value them at, I may be tempted to submit an offer. And if I message this person, they say, hey, I actually got a higher offer from someone else, would you be willing to pay an extra $30? Due to the asymmetric information, you're less likely to do so because you can't see the number of bids that have put on it, and you don't know if there's any legitimacy to what it is they're saying. So a reason this works better for somewhere like eBay than it does for something local with Kijiji is due to the information issue. Question 7. Some water quick. Okay. Perfect competition is the one industry structure that achieves all of the following: productive efficiency, allocative efficiency, and it maximizes social welfare. Like one of the achievements of the perfect competition listed above, describe what it means in your own words, and state why you believe it to be the most important standard. Our junior tutor has said that one of the achievements of perfect competition is allocative efficiency. The allocative efficiency is defined as the state in the market where goods are supplied to the consumers as per their satisfaction, preference, taste, and competitive price. The price of the product is quoted as the marginal cost of production, which means the consumer is not overpriced for the product and has to pay the best affordable rate for the product. In a perfect competitive market, price of the goods is marked marginal, so that consumers purchase them often, and mass purchasing gives the manufacturer a good turnover. The allocative efficiency shows cost cutting of the firm, which undertakes no advertisement on the product. It's done in order to reduce expenditure by the firm. The rates are kept marginal, that the consumer is willing to pay for the product frequently. Only thing I'm probably going to add to this is the characteristics of perfect competition. It's a very good answer by our junior tutor. So in perfect competition, firms are price takers, which means they have no influence over the price. If they charge any lower than the market price, they'll be taking losses, and if they charge any higher, nobody will buy the product. Secondly, this price is going to be equal to marginal cost, always. Third, everybody will be selling a homogeneous good, meaning that it is all the same. The products are not differentiated. Example I commonly use is like if you go to the grocery store for mushrooms and you see one package of mushrooms, the same amount, one package of mushrooms at $1 and the other at $2, you're obviously going to buy the $1 mushrooms. They're pretty well all the same. You don't think you're going to be getting some extra value out of the higher priced mushrooms. Four, there's going to be perfect information. And I'm missing a huge one, like one of the first ones I always write, and it's just not coming to me because it's been a long day, so I'm going to Google it. Many buyers and sellers. Of course, if there's only one buyer, we've got a monopoly. There's only a few buyers, an oligopoly. Or sorry, sellers, I should say. There's only one seller, got a monopoly. There is some sort of market structure for when there's only one buyer. I never learned much about it. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. Mono something. When I say perfect information, that pertains to this point here. Sellers and buyers have all relevant information to make rational decisions. So that's what defines perfect competition. Our junior tutor did an excellent job of describing allocative efficiency. So, yeah, actually, I think I have one question left in only 4 minutes, so I will definitely move on. Question 8. Categorize the following items as needs, wants, and demands. Provide justification for answers. A general education, a bachelor's degree, and study abroad. And our junior tutor has done so the same way I think I would. So general education is a need. Apart from food, clothing, and shelter, considered part of needs today has become education and healthcare. They do not require a push. Instead, they are required by people themselves. So this is kind of the bottom of the pyramid of needs here. You need your food, your clothing, your shelter. You need an education to understand the world around you. And you need a healthcare, although I suppose that one's debatable depending on where you live. Essentially, you cannot be a high-functioning member of society without some sort of general education. Bachelor's degree is a want. Our junior tutor said that wants are a step ahead and are largely dependent on human needs. To better standards of living, one might desire to have a bachelor's degree to be part of workforce participation and also to stand apart from others. So, if you educate yourself through high school, you do have a good base, and you can go work a lot of jobs and be a productive member of society. If you want to further educate yourself, it may open more doors down the line. So a lot of people want these doors to open. They want maybe better standard of living is a good way to say it. So they'll go for a bachelor's degree, but you don't need a bachelor's degree. Study abroad demands. Junior tutor said clearly the next step ahead of wants comes demands. When an individual wants something which is premium, he also has the ability to buy it. In essence, these wants are converted to demands. Achieving it or not is left to the individual's capability. So when it says demands here, it's not saying like, let me go study abroad. It's saying like, you are willing to pay for it if there's a price on it. In other words, it's something premium. It's a luxury. So say you're studying here in Canada, and you decide you want to go study abroad for a semester. You know it's going to be expensive, but the experience in itself is going to be very cool. So it's kind of a luxury to go study abroad. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Wrap it up here now. I think that was the last one. Yeah. So this has been Kevin from OneClass. Thank you for watching. If you've got questions of your own that you would like to ask, there should be, I believe, a link below this video. You can follow that, send in whatever question it is you want answered. Either myself or our other senior tutor, Ose, should be able to answer it sometime soon. Outside of that, you can like and share this video with your friends if you'd like. This has been Kevin from OneClass. Thank you for watching. Have a nice night.